Hello and welcome to Concepting and Creative for Virtual Production. My name is Daniel Malik. I'm the creative director here at View. We are a network of virtual production studios that operates across North America. We have 4 studios that we are shooting on the regular in virtual production around the clock, and we also have built and operated stages all over the country for clients and collaborators. We're really excited today to dig into a little bit of the creative process and what all goes into virtual production from start all the way to finish. And we're joined by some really great panelists today. So we're going to go ahead and get right into it and have some fun talking about virtual production. So with that, I'd like to introduce Kevin O'Brien. He is a director. And Kevin, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks. My name is Kevin O'Brien. I'm a director, a commercial director. I've been doing that for over 10 years now. I'm at Diamond View Studios currently, and that involves not only commercial directing, but writing a lot of concepts and pitching that to clients. A lot of times they'll bring us the concept. A lot of times we're developing the concept all from scratch. So that's a lot of fun, very diverse type of work. And so excited to talk about the ways virtual production kind of fits into that flow.
Awesome. And also we have a couple guests joining us from Nashville. So we have Joel Robertson joining us. Joel, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you do. All right. It looks like we're ready on Joel. Do we have Nathan Thompson joining us as well from Nashville?
Yes, nice to meet you all.
Awesome. Nathan, tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Nathan Thompson. I own a rental house in Nashville called Contrast Cine, and we specialize in a lot of high-end cinema cameras and technology and LED lighting. So I'm a gearhead overall. So I love learning about new technology. And then I also am a freelance cinematographer. So I've shot a multitude of projects there at View Nashville, an amazing facility. And I'm really excited to share some of what I've learned there.
Very cool. And we'll wait for Joel to join us as well. Joel is a VFX artist. Oh, Joel, do we have you?
I'm here.
All right, cool. Joel, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, my name is Joel Robertson, and I run a company called Fourth Crown Studios. We do visual effects. And in the last year and a half or so, we've kind of been getting into virtual production and, asset creation and environments. And I've done a little bit of directing as well. So I'm excited to be here and kind of have a little bit of perspective on both ends, pre-production and post-production side. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you guys too. And also to all our guests, thank you again for joining us. If you can, feel free to drop in the comments who you are, where you're from, what you do. We're excited to learn more about who we have hanging out with us today. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about, and I thought would be a really interesting place to kick this off, is when it comes to storytelling. You know, at the end of the day, virtual production is just another tool in the filmmaker's toolkit. We all love to tell stories. And Kevin, I'll start with you. As a storyteller, what makes you the most passionate about what you do, being a filmmaker, bringing your vision to life?
Well, what I've kind of found, I didn't even realize this until a few years ago, but what I've found is kind of my favorite, really the through line of my entry into the stories that I tell is empathy. I love finding the empathy in whatever story that is and whatever. So like, you know, I think a lot of us as directors, we will say like, you know, like we want to tell whatever story that there is, you know, like we're pretty diverse. We don't want to be like pigeonholed into like we're only a comedy person or we're only a drama person. And so what I've found is my through line is empathy. And so that can be really just what is it that the viewers can connect with, that they see themselves in, or they see, you know, their past struggles in, they see their future struggles in. So that connection, that can be a funny thing, that can be a heartwarming moment, that can be something that just really like helps them pause and smile. So those are really just that connection, that human connection is really my favorite kind of story to tell. Just helping people like pause for a second and feel something, I think.
Yeah, film is one of those interesting mediums where it allows you to see someone else's perspective and really, you know, communicate effectively what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. So that's really, really cool. Nathan, I'm curious to hear kind of your perspective a little bit. I recently got to see the spot that you shot with the school bus in our Nashville studio. Obviously, story was a very strong component to that. So as a storyteller, what kind of stories do you like to tell?
Well, my biggest background, I used to be, like, years back, I used to be in journalism. So definitely the human connection, I think, is certainly, just to kind of echo that sentiment. The human connection is always on the forefront for me. But I think the most exciting thing for me about like the LED volumes is like in Nashville, I've always thought, whether it's the short films that they make here, sometimes they're just so human centric that they lack a little bit of punch. Like, we don't have car chases, we don't have things blowing up, like there's not a lot of crazy stuff. So I'm like, well, hey, if this is an excuse to kind of dream bigger and be able to do things that feel bigger and more creative, that's what really excites me. So like on this project, View is so gracious in welcoming us into the studio, and that was more of like a spec ad. So at first it was going to be like a car commercial, because a car concept just kind of, it's the first thing that came to mind. But we were like, okay, we can use a jib, we can float around a car and do some creative things that were unusual, that would be really hard to do on a process trailer or something like that. But then we found out another team was doing a car spec. So it really allowed us to step back and think, no, like, what are the real possibilities here? Okay, we could bring a school bus into the studio. We could have a kid jump out the back on a wire rig and float off into space. And that was in our heads. And that's what we did, which is crazy to me. So really turning up the volume and dreaming bigger is what excites me about the possibilities with technology like this.
Really cool. Another topic that makes me think of is when it comes to the tools like we use. Obviously you did shoot that in virtual production, and Joel, I'll have you start with this one, but maybe we can roundtable it a little bit. What to you makes a tool useful in your creative process, both as a VFX artist and as a director?
Yeah, to me, I think what with any tool, I think if it opens up possibilities, or if someone, like, I think about the first time someone, or the first time I've seen an iPhone for the first time, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like the possibilities that open up whenever a technology is given to you is kind of what excites me. When I'm excited about something, I try to want to come at it from all different angles, and I want to try and use it in a way that it wasn't originally intended for, to see if I could break it and find some other way to, new technique to make something unique and interesting. And so to me, that's what, if a tool makes you excited or gives you, a ton of ideas, like that is what I look for in all this new technology that's coming out. And it's like, I mean, it's like drinking from a fire hose because there's so much stuff coming. But I'm excited to learn it all and just kind of get, immersed in it with, people like you guys and who are on the forefront of this.
I feel like I'll say that, like, the thing with tool, I'm completely with you on that. Although I'm not as much of a gearhead as a lot of filmmakers are. What I feel like what makes a tool useful for me, or my goal for, I guess it doesn't always work out this way, but my goal for tools and how I want to learn how to use them is that so they create these amazing opportunities and can put you in these positions, like a kid jumping out of a school bus, which is freaking awesome. But my goal is also to not distract from that story, right? So like, I just remember so many times with drones and like when everyone started using drones, and it was this thing of like, people would be watching a video and they would be they'd be watching your work, and no matter who was watching it, they'd be like, dude, sweet drone shot, like they'd stop what they were doing. It would like take them out of that story because they knew it was a drone shot, and it would like kind of ruin that moment. So that's one of my goals. Like, that's one of my things that I like to look for in tools, like that I can learn. And it takes a while to figure out how to use that tool in the right way so that it works for, and again, like each director, each artist is different in the way they use those tools. So for me, that's what I'm looking for, is the way to use that tool and learn it and figure out what works and what doesn't, so that it ultimately gets you to that visual that you want and that emotion that you want, but isn't like, oh, that's an LED screen, you know?
Well, that brings up a really good point, and something that we say a lot is we've done our job when you actually don't notice the virtual production or the screen or the environment. And that's true of any tool. I feel like is a tool is doing its best when you never notice it, which is an interesting thing to think about, because new tools like virtual production, like drones, like they're very exciting. They allow for some really cool things, but at the end of the day, it's all to serve the story. So you're so right. Nathan, I'm interested to hear your perspective on that a little bit, maybe talking about some of the exciting tools that you've used recently, virtual production one, obviously, but, I know you stay really busy with a lot of the work you do. So what are some of the exciting innovations that you're looking forward to, both in virtual production and beyond?
I mean, certainly the MOSIS system that integrates with the camera technology on the LED volume is incredible. Like we just did a spot in View Nashville where we were going for realism, and that is like the biggest challenge for me, is like your mind is kind of playing tricks on you, because you're in the studio, it's fake, and you're like, okay, am I selling this? Like, is the viewer going to believe this? And what can I do to help make everything feel more integrated and native to the picture? So the MOSIS system is amazing. So we were trying to sell the illusion of shooting in a pharmacy store. And so we had like 3 rows of real shelves with real products on them. And then the background was like all these other rows of shelves. And so with the MOSIS system, when you moved towards the screen, the perspective was exactly as if you were in the world, where the spacing between those shelves on the wall, the closer you got, the spacing opened up more. And like seeing that in real life was mind-boggling. And so that is certainly, when the camera raises up, the perspective in the world raises up as if you're really there. So that's crazy to see, and that really helps sell the illusion that this is not an illusion.
Yeah, and I think just to piggyback off of what you're saying too, is like, I think the practical art element of that as well really helps sell that. If you're shooting behind a counter or whatever, you have something in the foreground that really anchors what's happening in the background. And so I've noticed that this tool has kind of opened up, at least on my side of things, the dialogue between the art department and the visual effects team, working hand in hand to kind of figure out, design this world. So that's something unique to me. And I'm mostly a post guy. And so it's usually the shoot that's already happened, and then we go in and try to, do our thing after the fact. But it's a unique thing.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And, maybe even going a little bit into that, Joel, because you do have the background as a VFX artist, and I know you've designed environments for virtual production and for Unreal Engine. Maybe talk us through a little bit about that process, what that looks like, combining your expertise as a visual effects artist, but bringing that to an Icvfx workflow.
Yeah. Like I said, it's kind of a learning experience, because I'm used to being on set and saying, yes, we can do this and that here, that's going to be over here. And you're trying to explain to the actors, like, okay, there's going to be something behind you, or you're reacting to this thing, and it's just a green wall. And so it's nice to be able to pull that up and say, all right, here's where the lighting is, here's what you're reacting to. This is when you go down and you actually feel like you're there on on the set. And so to me, that is that's a game changer. Is you get, I think, better performances from people when they can kind of see what's already going on. And then in terms of just like the workflow, it was really unique to be able to partner with someone like View and your guys' team, to say, here's our capabilities, you know, like what can we build in terms of an environment that could help tell the story, like you were saying, Kevin. So we came up with a couple different locations. I think we went to a church, and I went to an actual physical church and kind of created a photogrammetry 3D model from that, and brought it into Unreal. I have a team, guy that I work with, his name's Cody Williams, and he's phenomenal. So he's able to like pull all these things into Unreal Engine, and even like the fact, like the small little details of, hey, here's what the pew looked like. We took photos of it. We can model that in 3D and then also send that to the art department, and they created a replica of actual pews. And so when we were on set, we had the practical pews lined up with the virtual pews, and we kind of did a move down the aisle, and it was really cool. You could not tell that, you know, where the real and the fake started.
Yeah, and it was a very impressive end result that you guys were able to capture with that. You know, you did bring up a really good point, though, which is the importance of art. And, you know, something that doing something like a photogrammetry scan allows is for you to get really good reference on set. It allows you to do some previs that is extremely useful because you're in the same environment and everything that you will be on your shoot day. But then I love that idea and that use case of using that that actual scan to as a reference for the art department. That's really cool. Kevin, I know that in a lot of your shoots, you are known for placing a big emphasis on art, and you've, I feel like, really pushed a lot of those boundaries in a lot of the productions you've done. So talk to us a little bit about your, you know, perspective on that.
Well, I think that was that was one of my, just like they were saying, that was one of my biggest learning experiences working with virtual production. You know, like I've been, my first shoot with virtual production was just over a year and a half ago. And so, you know, the part of what you learn is what you can get away with, what you need in the practical, what you need in the virtual world. And what I've found that works best for me is thinking of it, and I know you and I have had a lot of conversations about this, and you helped me understand this a little bit more, of thinking of it more of as an extension, and that whatever you can do practically really helps sell it, and then it just helps you expand on what you are, where you're at here and on the set. So to me, that just grounds the talent and the reality of where we are, whether you have like actual talent in the scene or whether it is just a, you know, it's a car shot or whatever it is. I think whatever you can do in reality to get art there, I think is really important, not only around where the car is, but in the foreground and between the talent and the screen, you know, all of those things. And it just matching as much as possible with what is in reality. And the trick of that too is the matching is having scheduled pre-lighting days so that you can see what it's going to look like in the environment in camera with all of it lit together. Like it's almost taking all of the post-production time into the pre-production schedule, and really is again, amazing things that you can do. One of my favorite things to do with it right now is playing around with, you know, like building sets and playing with the environments outside of windows, and what you can playing around with times of day, and, you know, so that within the same shooting day, you can have, you know, night and morning and all of these things within the same shooting day, still be in the same location. So it doesn't, I think sometimes with virtual production, we think of these big, giant, elaborate, you know, epic scenes, which are super cool to do as well. But I think sometimes these smaller little uses can serve the purpose just as well if that's what the creative calls for.
And
Yeah,
I've noticed that too in the Batman, the newest Batman, where they're seeing Gotham kind of outside the windows, but it's, you're within an actual location that they had built a set. And when I saw that kind of got my mind thinking as well too, like, oh, this doesn't have to be just a full-on environment. It could be just another piece of the puzzle when you're shooting.
Yeah, I think, a lot of people's first impression of virtual production is from a show like The Mandalorian or something where it has more of that sci-fi genre. And that is one of the greatest uses of virtual production is you can create environments that don't actually exist in real life very easily. But it's also really good at creating environments that you're used to seeing every day. Like Joel, you mentioned a church or a bedroom or whatever it might be. That's one of the strongest uses of virtual production as well. And it's literally the limit is your imagination. So you can take it to another planet, or you can take it right down to your living room and make whatever you want to. And actually that brings up an interesting question. And just so you know, for all of our viewers, we are going to open it up to some audience questions in a few minutes here. So we'll be switching to that in just a minute. And we also have a special announcement at the end. So make sure you stay tuned for that. But the next question I have, and feel free to answer whoever, is there a certain type of project that's best for Icvfx? Don't all
No.
go at once. No, why?
I think again there's individual scenes maybe within a project. Like I feel like there's some projects that most of it needs to be on location, and then there's just one or two moments that needs to be in virtual production or those little moments. I don't think that, like, we've had experiences where as a creative agency we've had experiences where people just want to use the technology, and so like let's kind of force a concept into the technology. And I think sometimes the creative ultimately suffers from that because that wasn't the right use for it. That would have been a better use as to actually build a set or to go on location. So yeah, I don't know if there are specific project that they're like, this is the right use for it. I feel like it kind of comes down to the artist, there are some projects that the artist is more familiar with green screen, and that's what they will create. The artist that you're with, that's what will create the better use for it. I am terrified of green screen, so I want to avoid that at all costs. And I really love virtual production, so I will use it whenever possible. I also love on location. So I think it's a matter of what also it matters with with budget and scope and talent, and like there's so many things, that pieces of the puzzle that kind of fit together, that there's not one specific project that type I think that is perfect for virtual production.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. So, when you think about concept and creative, like you just said, rarely do we start with a concept knowing that we're going to do it in virtual production. Usually virtual production is the tool that we end up choosing because it serves the story best. But there are circumstances like Nathan, I'm interested to hear your perspective because you concepted that school bus spot with virtual production in mind. So I'm curious, is now that you've used this tool for future projects, are you thinking through those with virtual production in mind and concepting around that, or are you still doing things the way you've always done and then finding that virtual production works?
Yeah, I think there's a huge, variety of potential applications for this. We call that the dream project. On that project, where we wanted to take a school bus to space, I got to admit, it was a pretty big relief that we didn't have to go for like perfect realism. We knew we were sending a kid to space, so there was a little bit of latitude on there. Like a lot of the space environments were purple or had accentuated colors, so that allowed me to like push the style of the whole piece, where we added more accentuated colors, accentuated oranges and purples even in the school bus. And not going for realism, to me at least as a DP, was a little bit of a relief because we could like push everything further. But on that spot, Joel's team actually built a couple city blocks for us. And at least on the opening shot, we were going for realism, more of a realism, but not exactly literal. We were okay with that kind of feeling a little bit video gamey from the start, which, you know, I mean, think about it. Unreal Engine is a video game engine. So I do think it's kind of a relief when that sort of look is acceptable and isn't going to like kind of set off any warning signs. It is harder to like make a store look like a real store. It's possible, but it is more of a challenge in terms of like everything that you have to fine tune in real time. But to me, that's part of the fun. Like,
yeah, you're right. There's a lot of trial and error in there, and to get it just right. And it is fun looking back at, you know, even where this technology was at just a couple years ago, and to see how far it's come in a very short amount of time. I'm curious to hear your perspective on that as well, Joel. You know, knowing that it's so important, the environment that we use and the assets that we use. How often are you building environments from scratch versus photogrammetry versus using assets that you find on TurboSquid or the marketplace? And what is your preference as an artist in that process?
That's a great question. I think for me, when we build an environment, I want to be able to use all the tools. And so, you know, a lot of times photogrammetry might get some noise in there, but a lot of times for storefronts or for rocks and you know, bushes or plants, like they work great. And so taking some of those elements and then putting it into the engine and figuring out, you know, pulling some stuff from Megascans, pulling stuff in from TurboSquid, like, you know, if you need cars or that sort of thing. It's, you know, like, I don't know if there's one particular way that I would do things. And obviously it all comes down to, you know, what Nathan was talking about, like what kind of style are you looking for? Because you can push it really stylized if you wanted to. But, you know, going back to the original question, I think, you know, things that are great for virtual production is like, you know, I can't tell you how many music videos that we've worked on that they were just like, we have 30 minutes to capture this scene during golden hour, and everyone's running around, you're racing, and it just feels hectic. But, you know, if you could set up golden hour and shoot in there for 8 hours, or, you know, things that are dangerous, like, you know, a burning, you know, barn or something like that. And I know that we've done that in the past practically, but you have all sorts of safety protocols that you got to do. But if you had something that was, you know, just kind of burning on a loop, you could take your time and move through the space and shoot it that way. It's not as hot. So, you know, things like that, you know, or even just, you know, going in one, if you wanted to shoot in Iceland, for example, and you don't want to move a crew of 30 or 40 people and fly them out and shoot in the practical space, you could potentially do that in, you know, doing photogrammetry inside of virtual production. So, and, you know, it's all, there's so many factors built into, you know, budget, time, you know, creativity, imagine it, you know, like all those things can kind of push or pull the direction each, you know, one way or the other.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, you know, something that I have always said is, you know, my preference, if you ask me, is like, I'd be the guy, I want to go to Iceland, I want to travel, I want to like do all that fun stuff. But the reality is I rarely have a budget to do that. So virtual production allows me to capture that type of imagery for my story without having to go through the expense and cost of actually traveling there. So that's really cool. Just a reminder that we are going to be asking some audience questions, so feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. I think we were having some issues with the chat a little earlier, but it should be working now. So so definitely let us know if you have any burning questions, either related to what we've been discussing or just virtual production in general. So one question that I had, and you touched on this a little bit, Nathan, but I am curious to hear your perspective again as a DP. What are some of the unique challenges or considerations that you take into account when you are doing a scene, lighting a scene in a volume versus what you do on location?
Sure. So on a volume, if I had the opportunity, I would make sure that all of my lights are RGB in a perfect world. Rarely do we work in a perfect world, but if you have full green, magenta, like hue control on all your lights, and you have full control over everything on your lights, that's really helpful when matching the LED volume. Some future, this is actually possible right now. I haven't messed with it yet, but I believe you are able to actually integrate LED lights into Unreal and to be controlled by that system. So that's something I want to learn in the future. I would say if you're not using RGB lights, then it's important to match your camera to the lights first and then adjust the wall, because the wall, you can adjust the hue, you can adjust the brightness, you can adjust the black levels, the white levels, you can adjust the overall brightness of the wall, and you can adjust the brightness of the world. And you can move the lights in the world around wherever you are and adjust the brightness of those lights or the sun or the position. So I kind of like to think about it as if you're a virtual colorist, and you're in communication with the virtual operator who's running Unreal or all of your backgrounds. And to me, the biggest lesson I've learned across the board is how important communication with your virtual operator is. You're using terminology that isn't typical for normal camera operating or working with a gaffer. So they're kind of a virtual gaffer, and you have to learn this new language of, okay, what are my black levels at? And then they'll give you a number or a slider value or something. And it's really important to notate all those values so you have a reference for what that means in your virtual environment. And maybe you want to come back to that. So that sort of communication has been my biggest takeaway. Build a relationship with your virtual operator, because they are the key to, if you want realism, to getting realism, or to getting your black levels on the volume to match your black levels in the real world, which I always use another really important assistance tool is a monitor just for the DP that you have at all times, and you're constantly checking false color so that you can look at the person or the set, the real person or the real set, check your black levels on them, and then immediately see, does that color match to the black levels on the wall? So that's, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point there. And, something that we have noticed a lot in this industry is, since it is so new, a lot of the operators and people that we work with on stages, they come from more of a game design background, not necessarily, having been on set, or, they might not know what a C-stand is, or, any of the lingo this language that we've created that we use on set. And so having that relationship with your operator is extremely important. And, they'll learn quick if they're paired with a good producer, a good director, good DP. But yeah, and it goes both ways. A lot of creatives and directors, cinematographers are learning, new things that we never thought we would be learning about, how a game engine works, and, dialing in all these different numbers and things. So yeah, very interesting. What about, and I'll throw this back to you again, Nathan, and feel free to chime in, guys, if you have other thoughts. But when it comes to, lighting in a scene, a question we get a lot from DPs especially is, controlling spill and, some of the other things you have to take into consideration when you're shooting with the LED wall.
For me, controlling spill wasn't as big of an issue as I thought it would be. The wall is quite bright. And generally I've had to bring like the wall's brightness way down. So I mean, we've had sky panels like, okay, one example was we were shooting an exterior outside of a pharmacy, and you know, on every shoot we've needed like more light, because, you know, think about the scale of an entire store outside. That's a lot of light going on outside. So we had cars in the foreground, and we really had to supplement with a lot of light. So we had like basically 6 sky panels in the scene with softboxes on. And 3 of them were pretty close to the wall. Obviously, we didn't have them pointing directly at our background, but we did have quite a lot of ambient light. And then we even had the ceiling panel on, at least at a certain level, to give us some ambience overhead. And I mean, the wall was bright enough to counteract the spill and the ambience going on. So that hasn't been a huge issue. I think the most important thing to think about is just letting the lighting in the world that you set motivate the lighting in your scene, so that's one of the things that adds believability to it, is not just lighting everywhere, but pay attention to where your sun is and let that directionality really inspire everything else you do.
Yeah, I would say too, one of the things early on that was a big learning factor was just the placement of the talent and cameras and all of that, you know, like making sure that they are distanced a good amount from the wall, so that there is that room to keep the spill from the wall. You know, like putting that distance, physical distance there, just helps you with several issues. And one of them is light spillage. Sometimes you need to be closer for, you know, angle, or if you need to get as wide as you can in the space, but that can help you a huge amount. And just kind of letting that be your base, is that you're starting with more you know, distance between the main talent and the wall, and then adjust that as you need to. But that's a huge thing for a multifaceted.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So we're starting to get some questions in. I have a question from Brad M. Can you use the volume as a green screen, and what is the difference? Any thoughts there? I'm looking at you, Kevin.
Looking at, yeah.
I have used the volume as a green screen, and I will say this: it was the easiest key that I ever keyed, because, you know, usually when you have to light a green screen, you have to make sure that it's lit evenly and that you're far enough away from you know, from everything else that you can light your subject and then light the green screen. With this, it is the light source, so it's 100% even. It was a one-click key. Now you do have to make sure that you're that the spill, like if you have a, you know, like the volume that you guys are in there in Tampa, you wouldn't want the green to wrap all the way around, because you're going to get all kinds of spill. But if you just throw up a, you know, a 12 by behind your subject, you're going to get a really clean key. Another tip that we thought worked out really well was we had a reflective floor, and that was reflecting the green as well. So that was keying out. So we weren't getting all of those kind of yucky shadows whenever you're kind of standing on a green cyc. So I think just overall in general, it killed, you know, virtual production kind of kills green screen, but then also it kills the way that you would traditionally do green screen as well.
Yeah, and another really cool thing you can do is you can set the Frustum, which is the part of the screen that is being rendered and camera tracked in real time. You can set just that portion to be the green screen, and the rest of the environment can be your environment. So you still get those natural ambient reflections, but you can key out whatever is behind your subject that is showing up in frame. So really, really cool feature of the engine there. I have a question from Luca from Italy. Hey, Luca. I was wondering if you ever encounter issues with slow motion shots, since I've often found it difficult to avoid moire in camera. Just curious if there's some way to avoid that. Yeah, I feel like any of us could take this question, but I'll throw it to you, Nathan, since you're our resident DP. Slow motion and the volume. Thoughts?
Yeah, it can be a challenge. You have to have your camera shutter speed synced up to the refresh rate of the wall. So we've always shot 24 frames per second at 144-degree shutter angle. We did have good luck shooting 48 frames per second and then doubling our shutter angle to 288 degrees. And we got no weirdness on the wall. So we were able to shoot 48 frames per second. That slowed down our shutter angle. So that's going to accentuate motion blur, which is not great. But it was, it still gave us usable shots, and it gave us double the amount of frames. So it was a success. Shooting 60 or above is probably a no-go, at least in terms of my experience. But, hopefully the technology can continue to improve where that type of thing is possible.
Yeah, this is a question we get a lot, actually. And it is one of those areas where there's still a lot of innovation and work to be done on. Like Nathan was saying, the max that we've done is 48. I think we've done 60 once or twice, but it is kind of pushing it. But when you think about it, the LEDs, at least in this studio here in Tampa, they're 60 hertz LEDs, which means they are refreshing 60 times per second. So it's physically impossible to shoot beyond that. There are screens that do 240 hertz and beyond. People are working on, but right now, that's one of those areas, because we do a lot with motion control as well, and cinebots and high speed. We always recommend going somewhere with a lot of light. If you're going to do that, but it's not the best project for a volume, which goes into that whole idea of what is the best tool for what you're trying to accomplish.
I will say we've had some concepts though where we wanted to use the volume, and whether it was for sports or whatever it was that we wanted to use the volume for, and we wanted to present a concept that included the volume. And so some of our workarounds were doing some really interesting things with lights, so that we're using the volume for a lot of things at full speed. And then we would have key moments where the screens shut off, and we would do different lighting and using practical lights to do some slow motion or do some high speed frame rates. So again, like you can, if you want to still use the space for certain moments and then get creative on that, there's ways to get around it depending on what your creative is, but and specifically for music videos, things like that, stuff that's a little bit more abstract. There were some ways that you can work around that.
Cool.
As Unreal Engine is a tool, it can run certain environments at 120 frames a second. So as far as the software goes, if you can get a way to capture your camera inside Unreal, you could potentially go into post and have that really fast or slow motion shot if you wanted to, key it out, or your subject, or roto your subject out, and then do almost like a virtual replacement with the scene back in the background, almost traditional VFX. That's you can also do that as well. And it's not in a volume, but it is using the tools.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Joel. I got a question from PJA. They use the volume for Thor: Love and Thunder. Do you guys see most blockbusters switching to this format over green screen? Great question. I'll throw this one back to you, Joel, since you're our VFX guy.
Yeah, I have noticed that there's a lot of adoption across the board, just in movies and television shows. I think the thing that studios like about it is probably a lot cheaper to shoot in a volume than to go to Africa and shoot something there. But I also think that, like Kevin was saying, like, it's just part of a tool. It's a tool. It's a tool in your tool bag. So, a lot of times, if you can get it on location, you're going to probably have a better experience than trying to shoot, do the whole virtual production thing. If it makes sense to do virtual production, go the virtual production route. if it makes sense to go outside and just shoot it, then, do that. So, yeah, I think the industry is definitely going head first into it. We've mentioned film, The Mandalorian, Thor, the Batman, they're all using it in slightly different ways, which is really cool. And I like to see what, people are using it for in different innovations, different techniques. But I don't think it ever becomes the only way of shooting anything.
Yeah, you're right. And actually, a really good example I like to point to is for Avengers End Game. If you remember the scene where they are all suited up and they're like getting ready to go in the time machine.
Spoiler alert! Is this a spoiler alert?
Yeah,
Jeez, man.
I'll stop there. But the suits that they were wearing, they would have been pretty easy suits for a costume department or wardrobe department to put together. But they just had the sheer fact of they didn't know what the costumes were going to look like, and so they couldn't shoot them. And the same goes for, I feel like, a lot of films and television shows, and they might not actually have the background, the environment entirely figured out. And in which case, it's really not a realistic situation for them to use virtual production, because, there is more work on the front end to develop the environment and to prep it for your shoot, versus, in post-production, you can, continually tweak and work on that thing until, you're ready to be done with it. So that's a little bit of a difference there.
Yeah, I do think, and because of that, I do think virtual production is a really great tool for commercial filmmaking and for those quicker, shorter, 1 to 2 day productions or in a week production that have that budget. It's a quick turnaround. There's not the year build up to it and all that whole thing, so it doesn't have that problem. Like, all those decisions are made and it's got to get out by this certain date. So it certainly is a great tool for commercial filmmaking.
Yeah, I will say one of the biggest requests that we've been getting recently is for long format content like film and television. And so it is a noticeable shift that's happening in the industry that, people see the advantages of virtual production and where it's, how it could be, like you guys are saying, another tool in the toolkit for some of these shows and movies. I'm going to do just a couple more questions here. We have -E. Are there any Unreal Engine assets that seem to be a shortage of in the library that need to be tackled to make virtual production more easy for filmmakers? So I'm gonna let Joel answer this, but one thing I do want to point out is the answer is yes. It's not necessarily a shortage in quantity, because there is a ton of resources and assets out there. It really comes down to optimization and what environments work well for Unreal Engine and for virtual production, and also how they are organized and set up. And I do not know all the details of this, so I'll leave it to Joel. But an example is like the sun in one environment could be called the sun, and in another environment it could be called the light, and so those are some of the different things that are issues right now. But Joel, I'll let you expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I know for us, you go to the Unreal Marketplace and there's all sorts of stuff, but just like with anything, you find some very video gamey kind of assets, and there are some really good environments that come on there, but it seems to be far and few in between. So I would say there's probably not a lack of content, but there's a lack of quality content that is ready for film and production. And so there's a huge need for all sorts of from environments to indoor scenes, bookshelves. There's just so many things that are, you're only limited to your creativity. And so that's the thing that excites me, but it's also like daunting, because where do you start if you wanted to create a library of things? You can always look at the Unreal Marketplace, but you kind of need to get in there and take a look. Like Daniel was saying, like sometimes there's no like standard for whatever is on the marketplace. So you may download something and it may look good, but then you find out that it may not be useful for your project. So yeah, I would just say like we're in definite need of, you know, quality content that would be, you know, film ready.
Awesome. And the last question that, you know, and here's where we'll leave it is, do you guys see yourself shooting entirely in Unreal Engine 5 for any sequences? And I think this is a really interesting conversation to have. Joel, I'm not sure what your perspective is on this, but you know, we've been doing a lot of testing across our network in Unreal Engine 5 and have been extremely impressed and happy with the results. And we're actually getting ready to shoot a few projects entirely in Unreal Engine 5. Joel, I'll let you expand on that if you have any additional insight into that new release.
Yeah, Unreal 5 is a game changer. It's just from the way that it handles lighting to the way that it handles geometry. You can almost throw an infinite amount of, you know, models at it, and it handles it really well. I don't know how it works. Whoever these engineers are geniuses. But I'm really excited to get in and use it because before Unreal 5, you would have to go in and optimize everything on several different levels. They're called LODs, where you have, you know, a high resolution model for things that are up close, and then things that are further back, you can have lower res, and it kind of drops off the further you get. That's how video games work. And the way that Unreal Engine works is it automatically does that for you, and it's seamless. So you could walk up to something and have, you know, see the fine grain of it and then walk away from it. And then it becomes almost, you know, a low resolution thing but you don't notice that change. And so that's really exciting to not have to worry about the scene file and how fast or slow it's going to run on your machine. Once that is, you know, you don't need to think about your budgets anymore in terms of, you know, poly counts and that sort of thing. You're free to, you know, be creative again and not worry about the technical and just worry about the artistic. And so I think that is, I think more and more people are going to flock to that and kind of take advantage of the benefits of it.
Yeah, we're big fans of Unreal Engine 5 here at Vfx. Done an amazing job getting that ready, and yeah, excited to put it to work. So with that, we do have one other thing we want to talk about here, but I just want to give a big shout out and thank our panelists for being a part of this conversation. Kevin O'Brien, Nathan Thompson, and Joel Robertson. Really appreciate you guys joining us. Had a lot of fun having this conversation on you know, all things creative and concepting for virtual production. So on that note, we have been working on something really exciting here at View that we want to release to some of our clients and creative collaborators and people who maybe are looking to explore virtual production for their next project. And so we'd like to open our doors at all of our studios across the country here in Tampa, Orlando, Nashville, and Las Vegas, and invite creative teams to come in and brainstorm and talk about what their next project could look like. And so, you know, we have a really talented creative team who is ready to support any ideas and help to brainstorm and think through things. And, you know, if you want to have your next creative meeting in the Maldives or, you know, in Iceland or wherever it might be, we can throw that up on the wall and we can start brainstorming and think through some really exciting things. So if you are interested in that and you want to come for an extended time and do that in one of our studios, shoot us an email at creative@viewstudio.com to apply. We have a limited amount of availability for that, but that email should be on the screen. So shoot us an email and we'll make it happen. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us, and for being a part of the workshop here. Hopefully you learned something. Feel free to hit us up on social media or on our website, and we'll see you at the next one. Thank you so much.